I was sitting in a courtroom, listening to my own daughter testify as if I were a stranger. Her voice was steady, her eyes cold. In that moment, it wasn't the money that broke me, it was realizing that love can disappear long before it dies. Betrayal doesn't always arrive with shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly, disguised as success, respectability, and the hunger to belong somewhere better. When trust is traded for status, when truth is buried under appearances, what's left isn't family, it's a contract waiting to collapse. This story isn't about revenge or redemption in the ordinary sense. It's about what happens when integrity becomes the only thing worth saving. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I was born in Galveston, Texas, the son of a man who fixed air conditioners long before the world thought comfort was a luxury. By the time I turned 15, I could take apart a condenser with my eyes closed and put it back together before supper. My father used to say, "A man's worth is measured by what keeps running after he leaves." I built my life around that sentence. Now, at 62, I run Garner Climate and Properties, a company that started with one rusted pickup truck and a half-broken wrench. People call me Mr. Garner these days, but to me, I'm still the guy who wipes sweat off his brow and prays the system cools before the client loses patience. Houston is a furnace 6 months of the year, and that's been good for business. 8 teams, 5 managed buildings, hundreds of calls during every heat wave. I could have retired by now, but retirement feels like turning off a motor that's still humming fine. I still drive out to Midtown every Tuesday, check on ductwork, or shake hands with a new tenant. It reminds me of the early days, when I'd skip meals just to afford Freon, when success meant keeping the lights on another week. People think I own a business. Truth is, I own a second chance. Every invoice I send carries my name, and that name has to mean something. I lost my wife, Laura, 15 years ago. Cancer took her faster than any compressor could fail. For a while, the house on Heights Boulevard echoed like an empty workshop, silent, except for the steady hum of the air unit she insisted we install ourselves. After she passed, our daughter Emily became the only reason I kept going. I'd bring her along on service calls during summer breaks. She'd curl up in the passenger seat, reading books while I replaced filters in attics so hot you could fry an egg on the insulation. Sometimes she'd fall asleep with the hum of the truck rocking her. Those were the happiest days of my life. Simple, sweaty, full of purpose. When Emily got into the University of Texas at Austin, I cried behind my workbench. I paid her tuition from every emergency job I took, every building lease I managed. Watching her graduate felt like redemption for everything I never got to finish. She moved back to Houston and started working in interior design, sharp, confident, always with a sketchbook in hand. She told me she wanted to make spaces feel like stories. I believed her. I still do. Then came River Oaks, the world of manicured hedges, white wine lunches, and charity galas where people discuss art prices like grocery lists. Emily began meeting clients there, then friends, then someone named Brandon Whitaker. The Whitakers were oil money through and through, one of those families with portraits older than the state itself. Brandon had the smile of a man who'd never worked a day in the sun. When Emily brought him home the first time, he offered to shake my hand like he was inspecting a tradesman he might hire. I noticed how he looked at my uniform shirt, still carrying traces of copper dust. He asked polite questions about blue-collar entrepreneurship, a phrase that sounded like he'd just read it in a magazine. I answered politely too, but I could already see the distance forming. I didn't mind that Emily wanted a better life. Every father wants that for his child. What I feared was her forgetting that better doesn't mean higher. I'd built everything we had with my hands. Burned fingers, late nights, and promises kept to strangers who became loyal customers. Emily grew up watching that, but River Oaks had its own kind of gravity. Its people smiled while judging, offered compliments that bent like wires under pressure. I watched her change little by little, polish replacing grit, caution replacing curiosity. Still, every Sunday she called, and I thought things were fine. We'd talk about her projects, the townhouse she wanted to buy, the business she dreamed of starting. She'd say, "You know, Dad, I learned from the best." And I'd laugh, pretending not to notice how her voice sounded more and more like the people she worked for. When I drove through those streets to drop off something she'd forgotten, usually tools or a box of bulbs, I'd see her reflection in the glass doors of those perfect houses. She fit in, but not quite. Maybe that's what scared me the most. At night, I'd sit by the window, coffee cooling beside me, thinking about how life had taken me from fixing coils to running contracts worth hundreds of thousands. I was proud, sure, but pride doesn't keep you company when your only child starts speaking another language, the language of money without sweat, ambition without anchor. Sometimes I'd walk into the garage just to smell the mix of oil and metal. It reminded me who I was and where all this came from. Houston hums like an engine that never rests. You hear it in the refineries, in the trucks rolling down I-45, in the air units on every roof. That hum used to be the sound of family for me. Now, it's just noise echoing through an empty house. I tell myself Emily will remember the long nights, the broken fan belts, the laughter in that old truck. But memory fades when comfort grows. I never knew that the tools that built my life would one day be the very things my daughter would hide from. If you've ever wondered how one quiet decision can change everything, stay with me. This moment sets off a chain you won't believe. The morning I signed the wire transfer, the office smelled like solder and coffee. My accountant had just left, and the hum of the air compressor was the only sound in the building. I remember staring at the numbers on the screen. $850,000 for the secured loan, another $350,000 for the startup contribution. It wasn't a gift, it was a foundation. I'd spent 30 years turning sweat into equity, and I wanted Emily to learn that money should be earned even when it's inherited. Nadia Ruiz, my attorney and oldest friend, sat across from me flipping through the loan documents. "You're doing this right," she said. Not as a father, but as a businessman protecting his principles. I smiled, pretending the paper didn't shake in my hands. The signatures felt heavy. My name, Thomas Garner, appeared on every line: lender, guarantor, trustee. The company seal stamped at the bottom with a soft, metallic click. When we were done, I looked out the window at the parking lot shimmering under the Texas sun and thought of Emily as a little girl, handing me wrenches and asking, "Is this the one, Daddy?" That same girl now had her own company, Lumen and Linen, a brand built on sustainable design and soft colors she said made people feel peaceful. I transferred the money through Lone Star Trust Bank, choosing it because I'd worked with them for decades. Caleb Monroe, the compliance officer, confirmed the transaction personally. "All secure, Mr. Garner," he said. "We'll monitor the account and keep the loan covenants updated." For a brief moment, pride pushed away the anxiety. I imagined Emily leading meetings, sketching blueprints, and sending me updates on revenue. I thought, maybe this is what legacy really means, not just what you leave behind, but who carries it forward. That night, I cooked a simple dinner and raised a glass of iced tea to the empty chair across from me. "Here's to you, kid," I whispered. "Make it count." A week later came the invitation to River Oaks. "Dinner with the Whitakers," Emily wrote. "Dress nice." The mansion looked like something out of an old movie. Columns, marble floors, chandeliers big enough to light a church. I wore my best blazer, the one Laura bought me 15 years ago for our anniversary. Conrad Whitaker, Brandon's father, greeted me at the door with a politician's smile. "Tom, right? I've heard so much about your business. Heating and cooling, correct?" His tone carried that polite curiosity people use when they're trying not to sound superior. "That's right," I said. "We keep Houston breathing when the heat gets biblical." Elise, his wife, handed me a drink and said, "Practical men are rare these days." The way she lingered on the word practical made it sound like a synonym for uncultured. Emily looked beautiful, glowing in the candlelight, but she laughed a little too quickly at their jokes, sipped her wine a little too nervously. When I mentioned the startup's next steps, Conrad nodded vaguely. Ah, yes, the creative venture. We'll make sure she has the right support. He said we, as if I hadn't already written the checks. I felt invisible in a room full of silver and crystal. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. Emily would prove herself, and they'd see what I saw. Back home, Nadia emailed the finalized copies. Lien filed, escrow milestones defined, cross-default clause attached. Her note was short, all compliant. Monthly reports due by the 10th. I printed it, slid it into a folder, and placed it beside Laura's old photograph. She's got this, I told the picture, as if my wife could still calm my nerves from wherever she was. Days passed without updates. I figured Emily was busy setting up her townhouse, hiring designers, maybe arguing with Brandon about color palettes. Then, one afternoon, I sent a message just to check in. How's everything going, sweetheart? Need any help? No reply. The next morning I tried calling, but the line rang until it clicked into silence. I told myself to relax. People in business get busy, they forget to call. But 3 days later, my text bounced back with a gray notification. Message not delivered. That phrase looked sterile on the screen, but it cut like betrayal. I checked the loan account online. Money moved out as scheduled, funds dispersed properly. Everything was professional, efficient, and utterly cold. I reread the clause Nadia had underlined. Communication failure constitutes default. Legal language, clean and distant, yet it carried something deeply personal. For the first time, trust had a time stamp. That evening, Houston's sky turned orange with heat haze. I drove past Midtown, where Emily's townhouse was under renovation. Through the open door, I saw workers moving boxes, laughter echoing from inside. I wanted to step in, to see her, to remind her that this dream was built on more than numbers, but I kept driving. Sometimes a man knows when he's no longer welcome. At the office, I turned off the lights and sat in the glow of my computer. The contract glared back at me, every clause a mirror of my own caution. I whispered into the quiet, "When did love start needing legal clauses?" Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city, a low warning before the storm. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded over my chest, and told myself what every father learns too late. Trust, once written into a contract, already carries the shadow of its end. If you're still watching and feel that chill of something big about to break, comment number 1 below to let me know you sense it too. Because what happens next turns the calm into chaos. The first email came on a Tuesday morning. The subject line read, "Activity discrepancy, Garner Climate and Properties / Lumen and Linen." I thought it was a routine update, maybe an automated flag from the bank. But when I opened it, my stomach tightened. The message from Lone Star Trust Bank was brief. Early withdrawal request initiated and approved. Funds released in full. Oh? I stared at those words until the screen blurred. It wasn't possible. The release clause required project milestones, monthly reports, dual verification, my verification. I grabbed my phone and called Caleb Monroe. He answered on the third ring, his voice unusually formal. "Mr. Garner, I was just about to reach out to you." "Cut to it," I said. "What withdrawal?" "There's been an early request, signed by both Miss Garner and Mr. Whitaker. The funds were transferred to a Whitaker Holdings account last week." My throat went dry. That's impossible. I never approved it. "Sir," he said carefully, "according to our records, the transaction met the required signatories. Both parties authenticated via the online portal." I gripped the phone tighter. "Both parties?" "Yes, sir, Ms. Garner and yourself." I hung up without another word. The hum of the office suddenly sounded deafening. The air conditioner rattled like a bad bearing, steady and relentless. My name, my signature, had been used without my consent. Either the system had been compromised or someone had access to credentials they shouldn't have had. For a few long minutes, I just sat there, staring at the framed photo of Emily on my desk, the one where she's wearing her graduation cap and beaming like the world owed her nothing but sunlight. I remembered the day she told me, "I'll always keep you in the loop, Dad." Now, there wasn't even a loop left to keep. I drove to the old office space downtown, the one I helped her lease 6 months earlier. The glass door still bore the faint outline of lumen and linen where the vinyl letters had been peeled away. Inside, the rooms were empty except for a few rolls of wallpaper and a dusty drafting table. The building manager, a gray-haired man with a clipboard, recognized me. "They moved out 2 weeks ago," he said, "didn't leave a forwarding address." I thanked him and walked back to the truck, heat waves rising off the asphalt like ghosts. My next stop was the townhouse I'd helped her finance. A security guard at the gate stopped me before I could enter. "Residents requested no visitors today, sir." His tone was polite but final. I left my business card anyway. "Tell her father stopped by." As I turned to leave, something on the community board caught my eye, a glossy flyer pinned among neighborhood ads. Lumen and linen liquidation sale, partnership opportunity, contact Brandon Whitaker. The words hit me like a pipe to the ribs. Liquidation, partnership. They were selling what I'd built for her, folding it into the Whitaker empire like a trinket. I felt my pulse rise, the kind of heat that makes you forget the air around you is still. That evening, I met Nadia at a small cafe near the courthouse. She was halfway through her espresso when I slid the flyer across the table. "They emptied the account," I said, "and they're using my name to do it." She studied the document quietly. Escrow releases require dual authentication. Caleb shouldn't have approved it unless the system was overridden. "You think someone inside helped?" Her eyes narrowed. "Whitaker Holdings has ties to the bank. A favor called in, a signature pushed through. It happens." I rubbed my temples. I wanted to help her, Nadia. I wanted her to have something that was hers. "You gave her something," she said softly, "but she might not have known how to handle it." "Handle it?" I said bitterly. "She handled it straight into their pockets." Nadia sighed. "Tom, if they violated the agreement, you can trigger default. We'll prepare notice tomorrow." I nodded, though the word default felt colder than any contract clause. It meant war, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to fight my own child. The drive home was long and silent. Houston's skyline shimmered under the heat haze, a mirage of glass and ambition. As I crossed Allen Parkway, I looked at the river below, muddy, sluggish, reflecting nothing but the orange glare of the streetlights. It looked like how I felt, clouded, heavy, slow. When I got home, I called Whitaker Holdings directly. The receptionist answered cheerfully, the sound of typing in the background. "Good afternoon, Whitaker Holdings." "This is Tom Garner. I need to speak with Brandon." "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker's schedule is full today. And Mrs. Whitaker," she paused, correcting herself. "Mrs. Whitaker no longer lists Garner Climate and Properties as a partner in her portfolio." Her words echoed like a verdict. I thanked her, though my voice cracked, and ended the call. That night, I sat in my office surrounded by silence. The contract with Emily's signature lay open on my desk, the ink still crisp. I picked up my pen and wrote in my notebook, "If blood can sign contracts, it can also break them." Then I reached into the drawer, pulled out the flash drive I'd backed up months ago, and plugged it into the computer. The screen glowed blue, lines of data loading like quiet revenge. If they wanted silence, I muttered, I'd answer with the only language they respected, documentation. The office was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that only exists when a man's hope is dying, but his pride keeps breathing. I sat behind my desk, surrounded by files and blueprints, trying to convince myself this wasn't happening. The air smelled of metal and dust, the scent of work that had once meant progress. Now, it just reminded me of everything I'd built for someone who no longer answered my calls. I wrote Emily a letter, an old-fashioned one, with ink that smudged where my hand trembled. I didn't accuse her of anything. I simply asked for the truth. "If you made a mistake, it can still be fixed," I wrote. "Money comes and goes, but blood shouldn't be so disposable." I sealed the envelope, drove to the FedEx drop box, and paid for overnight delivery. 3 days later, it came back stamped in red. "Recipient not at this address." That was the morning my patience turned into motion. I called Lone Star Trust Bank and arranged a meeting with Caleb Monroe. Their downtown headquarters looked like a monument to glass and ego, polished marble floors, gold lettering, and employees who smiled without showing their teeth. Caleb greeted me in the lobby with the kind of nervous politeness reserved for ticking bombs. "Mr. Garner, I appreciate you coming in," he said, gesturing toward a private office. I didn't sit. "You told me the withdrawal was authorized by both parties," I said. "I need to know who overrode the security." He hesitated, glancing at the frosted glass door. "Sir, I can only tell you that the transaction met compliance standards." "I didn't ask about standards, Caleb. I asked who gave the override." Finally, he exhaled. "Mr. Whitaker had senior clearance through our corporate accounts division. His family's company, Whitaker Holdings, maintains preferred partner status with Lone Star Trust." There it was, the connection I'd been too blind to see. Whitaker Holdings didn't just steal my daughter, they owned the very system I trusted to protect her. When I walked out of that building, the sun hit like punishment. I got into my truck, turned off the air conditioning, and let the heat burn through the numbness. On the dashboard, the letter to Emily lay folded, its return stamp like a wound. That night, I sat at my kitchen table drafting an email. I kept it simple, almost gentle. "If you made a mistake, we can fix it. Just talk to me. I'm still your father." When I hit send, the message bounced back instantly. "The address you're trying to reach no longer exists." I stared at the screen for a long time. "No longer exists." The words felt heavier than any verdict. 2 days later, I tried calling Whitaker Holdings again. The receptionist answered with a practiced smile in her voice. "Good afternoon, Whitaker Holdings. This is Tom Garner. I need to speak with Brandon or Emily Whitaker." "I'm sorry, sir. They're out of the country for the next few weeks." "Where exactly?" "I'm afraid that information isn't available." She hung up before I could reply. I realized then, they hadn't just taken my money, they'd erased me. Nadia filed the notice of default that same afternoon. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had seen too many people learn the hard way. "It's official now," she said. "They're in breach. We'll initiate the asset freeze clause." Lone Star Trust replied within hours. "Your request will be reviewed within 60 days. 60 days. Long enough to launder everything beyond reach. I stayed late at the office that night, digging through old records, searching for anything that could explain how my signature appeared on the authorization. Around midnight, I found it, a digital contract labeled Addendum 3A. The signature block bore my name, perfectly replicated. The notary stamp read, Lone Star Trust, Notary Department. My pulse quickened when I checked the metadata. The IP address matched one of my company workstations. Someone had accessed my office remotely. I pulled up the building's security footage for that weekend. The video quality was grainy, black and white, but enough to see headlights flash across the parking lot at 11:43 p.m. A dark BMW sedan stopped outside the door. The next frame showed the door unlocking. A tall man in a suit walked in, stayed 15 minutes, then left. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred, but I recognized the silhouette, Brandon. The betrayal was complete. It wasn't just lies, it was premeditated theft, wrapped in the language of family. For a moment, I felt rage bubbling up, sharp and hot, ready to consume what was left of my restraint. Then Laura's voice drifted back from memory. "The moment you let anger lead, you lose the fight." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. The anger cooled into something far more dangerous, clarity. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines in block letters. Keep it clean, keep it documented, keep it legal. When I left the office, the streets of Houston shimmered under sodium lights. I drove through River Oaks, where the Whitakers lived behind their iron gates and manicured hedges. The reflection of their world danced on my windshield, perfect, sterile, expensive. I whispered to myself, they think I'll disappear. But the man who built an empire from pipes doesn't vanish that easy. Back home, I turned off every light except the desk lamp. It shone directly on the forged contract, casting long shadows across the paper. I stared at it for a long time, that single beam of light holding back the darkness. Then I whispered, "Let's see how well they handle the truth when it's filed in court." The headline caught my eye before the coffee did. Whitaker Holdings expands into sustainable design after private acquisition. There, beneath the glossy photograph of Brandon shaking hands with a city councilman, were the words that turned my stomach. The acquisition was made possible by an undisclosed private investor. Undisclosed. That was me, scrubbed out like a smudge on a marble floor. I read every line twice, tracing how they'd folded Lumen and Linen into their empire, repackaged it as their own innovation. They'd stolen my daughter's dream and my money, and now they were building their reputation on it. The barista asked if I wanted a refill. I didn't answer. I was too busy watching my name vanish in print. By noon, I was in Nadia's office, the article spread across her desk. "They just made it public," I said. "Every lie, signed and printed." She read silently, then looked up. "If we go forward, this becomes public record. They'll fight dirty." "They already started the fight," I said. "I'm just taking my name back." That afternoon, we filed an emergency motion to freeze the disputed assets. But I knew paperwork alone wouldn't stop men like Conrad Whitaker. They moved in shadows made of money and lawyers. I needed light, weird, undeniable light. So, the next morning, I called Marcus Denton, an old acquaintance from the Houston Tribune. He owed me a favor from a maintenance job years ago when I fixed his office AC at midnight for free. "Marcus," I said, "I've got a story for you. It's not pretty, but it's real." 2 hours later, we walked into Lone Star Trust Bank together. Nadia was already waiting, folders in hand. The lobby gleamed like a fish tank, glass walls, quiet air, everyone pretending not to stare. The receptionist blinked when I said, "I'm here to see the compliance board." "They don't take unscheduled meetings," she said, tight smile. "Then you can tell them a journalist is recording from the lobby," Marcus replied, raising his phone. Within minutes, a security officer escorted us to a conference room. 3 executives in gray suits sat across the table. One of them, a woman with perfect posture and colder eyes, spoke first. "Mr. Garner, we understand there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I slid the forged contract across the table. "You call identity theft and asset fraud a misunderstanding?" No one answered. Nadia opened her folder and laid out the evidence. Digital timestamp logs, IP address records, and still frames from the security footage showing Brandon's BMW outside my office. Caleb Monroe entered halfway through the meeting, pale and sweating. His eyes darted to mine, then away. "Mr. Garner," he said softly, "they told me to approve it. Said it was part of a private restructuring. If I refused, I'd lose my job." The room froze. One of the executives muttered, "That's enough, Mr. Monroe," but he kept talking. "Whitaker Holdings has investment control over several of our corporate divisions. The executive slammed her folder shut. "This meeting is over." Nadia stood. "Not quite. We're filing this statement and the recording with the court. You can call your PR team next." As we walked out, Marcus whispered, "That'll print well." But the day wasn't done with me yet. That evening, Nadia received a call from an unlisted number. I could hear only her side of the conversation. "Who is this?" "Yes, I understand." "Send it securely." When she hung up, her expression had changed. "Someone inside the bank," she called herself Lucinda, "just sent us internal emails. They show Whitaker Holdings transferring your funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." "Why would she help us?" I asked. "She said she has a family," Nadia replied quietly, "and that you deserve the truth." It was the first honest thing I'd heard in weeks. By nightfall, I was parked outside the Whitaker estate. The gate lights shimmered against the black paint of my truck. I didn't plan to go inside, but something in me demanded to be seen. I rang the bell. Brandon opened the door, tie loosened, confidence still intact. "You should have stayed quiet," he said. "And you should have stayed honest," I replied. Emily appeared behind him, eyes swollen, lips trembling. "Dad, please." "Don't," I said gently. "You forged my name. You drained my accounts, and you let them sell our name for their profit." Brandon smirked. "Business, Tom. You taught her that." "No," I said. "I taught her integrity. You taught her greed." I placed the folder in Emily's hands. "These are your mother's lessons, written in paper and proof. You don't destroy family for furniture and champagne." For a moment, I thought she might speak, but she only turned away, shoulders shaking. Brandon stepped forward, jaw tight. "You're done here, huh?" I looked him in the eye. "No, son. You are." As I turned to leave, I heard glass break behind me, a sharp crash followed by Emily's sob. I didn't look back. Some houses are made of money, others of truth. Only one survives the storm. 2 days later, the news broke. Local businessman files lawsuit against Whitaker Holdings for forged assets. The story spread faster than heat in a Houston summer. The Whitaker stock dipped 8%. Reporters gathered outside their mansion, while Emily's face appeared on every channel. I sat in my office that night, watching the broadcast replay. My reflection stared back from the darkened screen. I whispered, "This isn't revenge, it's repair." And for the first time in months, the air in my office felt clean. The storm I'd unleashed had taken on a life of its own. Newspapers splashed my name across front pages. Garner versus Whitaker, a battle for integrity. The evening news replayed sound bites from the courthouse steps, and analysts speculated how deep the Whitaker scandal ran. Each day brought another headline, another piece of Brandon's empire unraveling. But beneath the noise, I saw only one face, my daughter's. Emily's photograph appeared on a late-night news segment, her hair pulled back, eyes swollen from crying, the caption beneath reading "Complicit Heiress." I turned off the television before the anchor could finish. The truth had cleared my name, but it was burying hers. I sat in my office long after midnight, watching the city lights flicker through the blinds. The phone rang twice, reporters probably, and went silent. Somewhere between the hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the wall clock, I heard her voice from years ago. "I'll never lie to you, Daddy." The memory felt like glass pressed against my heart. The next morning, Nadia arrived with a folder. "Federal investigators opened a file," she said. "If you sign this affidavit, the Department of Justice will move forward with criminal charges. Whitaker Holdings, Brandon Whitaker, and any associated signatories, that includes Emily." The word hung in the air like smoke. Nadia's voice softened. "You don't have to decide today. But once you sign, there's no taking it back." I nodded, but words failed me. She left the folder on the desk and walked out, heels echoing like a countdown. That night, I found a small envelope slipped under my office door. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, from Lucinda. Inside was a short note. "I've been dismissed from the bank. I don't regret helping you. Truth costs everyone something. Thank you for reminding me it's still worth paying for." Her words hit harder than any lawsuit. Truth had a price, and I wasn't sure I could afford what it was costing my daughter. The following afternoon, as I reviewed old contracts, I heard a soft knock on the door. When it opened, Emily stood there. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in a plain coat, eyes sunken but determined. "Dad," she whispered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She glanced around the office at the pictures on the wall, me, her, and her mother, smiling on a fishing trip from decades ago. Her voice trembled. "I didn't know what Brandon was doing. I signed things I didn't read. I trusted him." You trusted the wrong man, I said quietly. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was ashamed, not of you, of myself. I wanted to prove I wasn't just your daughter living off your shadow. I sighed, the weight of years pressing down on my chest. Were you ashamed of me, Emily? She shook her head, crying harder. I was ashamed that I failed you. Before I could speak, Nadia entered, holding the affidavit. The silence between us grew heavy. Tom, she said gently, they need your signature. Now. The document sat before me like judgment itself, one stroke of ink that could send Brandon to prison and take Emily with him. I looked at her, trembling, broken, no longer the ambitious woman who had betrayed me, but the frightened child I once carried on my shoulders. I picked up the pen, turned to Nadia, and said quietly, the law will handle the guilty, but I won't let the truth destroy what's left of my daughter. I crossed out Emily's name from the list of defendants. Nadia's eyes widened. You're giving up your leverage. No, I said, I'm giving it meaning. I signed the rest, slid the paper across the desk, and leaned back in my chair. Outside the window, the sun was setting, throwing orange light across the glass towers downtown. The same buildings that once symbolized greed now glowed like they were on fire, burning, beautiful, and temporary. Emily stood silently beside me, her hand resting on the affidavit I'd spared her from. For the first time in months, she whispered, "Thank you, Dad." I didn't answer. Some forgiveness doesn't need words. It just needs an ending. Everything looked clean again, but nothing felt pure. The office smelled of lemon polish and silence, a silence that used to mean focus, but now felt like judgment. A week had passed since I signed the last document, since the storm settled and left me standing among the wreckage. Papers lay neatly stacked on my desk, but my life felt scattered into pieces too small to gather. News about the Whitakers had faded from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals, yet traces of it lingered, an article reposted, a whisper at the diner, a stranger's glance that lingered half a second too long. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd done the right thing. Justice, in its own cruel rhythm, had played its tune. But right and easy rarely meet on the same road. Brandon Whitaker was now an international fugitive, reportedly hiding in Dubai under a false identity. Whitaker Holdings had collapsed within days, its executives turning on each other in court filings. Employees, hundreds of them, lost their jobs overnight. Shareholders demanded answers. They wanted someone to blame, and my daughter's name appeared too many times in the reports. Emily had been questioned, but the prosecutor spared her from charges after she cooperated fully. Negligence without criminal intent, the report said. It sounded clinical, detached, like her tears didn't matter. The public, of course, decided otherwise. To some, she was a victim. To others, an accomplice. For me, she was both, my daughter, and my greatest heartbreak. Garner Climate and Properties took its own blow. 2 major clients pulled out. Reputational risk, they called it. Another bank flagged my accounts for further review. Apparently, saving your child from financial ruin makes you look suspicious in the eyes of systems built to doubt sincerity. I wasn't angry, just tired of fighting to prove I wasn't the villain in someone else's story. Nights were the worst. The house echoed with its emptiness. I still brewed 2 cups of coffee every morning, one for me, one for no one. Old habits die hard, especially when they used to mean love. Sometimes, I dreamed of Laura. She'd stand in our old garden, hands covered in soil, smiling softly. "You can't fix everyone, Tom," she'd say. "Some things have to break." I'd wake up aching for her voice, hating how right she always was. One gray afternoon, Emily showed up unannounced. She stood in the doorway, no makeup, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail. In her hands was an apple pie, the kind her mother used to make. She placed it on the counter like a peace offering. "I thought you might want dessert," she said. Her voice trembled. I poured coffee for both of us, the way I used to. "I wanted to thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." "I didn't save you," I said quietly. I gave you a second chance to save yourself. We didn't say much after that. Words felt too fragile, like one wrong syllable might shatter whatever was left between us. When she left, I stood at the window watching her drive away in an old car that didn't quite fit her anymore. For the first time, she looked like a person trying to live, not just pose for it. Later that evening, I drove past the old Lumen and Linen warehouse. The company logo had been scraped off the wall, leaving a pale rectangle where pride used to live. Dust covered the windows, and the air smelled like metal and memory. I parked the truck and sat there for a long while, staring at what ambition and betrayal had built, and what truth had burned to the ground. As I drove home, rain began to fall, slow, cleansing, deliberate. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the world outside was blurred into gray streaks of light. I walked inside, opened my old notebook, and wrote the first line in weeks. Rebuilding doesn't always mean starting over. Sometimes it means starting honest. I closed the book and let the rain speak for a while. Somewhere in the rhythm of it, I heard the faintest echo of peace. Not triumph, not joy, just the quiet relief of surviving the fire. Autumn settled quietly over Santa Fe, the kind of season that carried both endings and beginnings in its cool breath. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and from my office window, the mountains looked gentler than they had in months. I arrived early, unlocking the door before sunrise. The place was silent except for the faint hum of the air vents and the sound of papers shifting under the morning draft. I'd redrawn the company's direction on a single page: integrity first, local roots, honest work. No more partnerships with glossy investors chasing quick returns. Garner Climate and Properties would rebuild small, clean contracts, modest growth, and people who cared more about doing right than looking rich. The door creaked open. Emily stepped in, holding a notebook and wearing jeans instead of the designer dresses that used to announce her before she spoke. "I want to learn," she said quietly. "Not the money side. The real side." I studied her, half waiting for the old tone of entitlement to surface, but it didn't. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but humility. I nodded toward the spare desk. "Then start here." Our first week together was awkward. She arrived early, stayed late, and made every rookie mistake imaginable. She forgot safety helmets, lost receipts, and once showed up to a site inspection in heels. But she didn't complain. Every time she fell short, she tried again, quietly, stubbornly. I saw pieces of Laura in her, the persistence, the quiet strength beneath the nerves. One afternoon, I took her to a renovation project on the south side, a small row of rental units we'd built for veterans. The workers greeted me with easy smiles, their hands rough, their jokes crude but kind. When they realized Emily was my daughter, they treated her like one of their own. An older tenant recognized me. "You fixed my furnace 3 winters ago when the whole block lost power," he said. "Didn't charge me a dime." Emily looked at him, then at me, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding. For the first time, she saw what my work really meant, what respect built, dollar by dollar. That night, as we drove back, she spoke softly. "I thought success was about who you knew. But these people respect you because you help them." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence teaches better than speeches. 2 days later, she found an old binder buried in the company archives, a collection of investment documents from a decade ago. Her face went pale when she brought it to my desk. "Dad, this signature, this is from Brandon's old firm." My heart dropped. The papers detailed an old land development deal I'd funded years earlier. One Brandon had secretly used as collateral in his laundering scheme. My money, my name, woven into the same scandal that nearly destroyed us. Emily's hands shook. "He used you too." For a moment, anger surged, the familiar fire I thought had burned out. But when I saw her guilt, it faded into resolve. "Then we fix it," I said, "together." We called Richard, my old attorney. He agreed to help us clear the records, to expose Brandon's deception once and for all. "You've got the truth on your side this time," he told me, and that's rarer than gold. That evening, Emily stayed for dinner. The house felt alive again. The smell of stew, the clatter of dishes, the sound of two people learning how to talk without shouting. She lifted her glass of water. "Maybe the only way forward isn't forgetting the past," she said softly. "It's owning it." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes after too many storms. Outside, the last light of sunset touched the half-finished veterans' housing site, turning the scaffolding gold. I opened my old notebook and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't a gift you give others. It's the permission you give yourself to heal." For the first time in months, I felt lighter. Maybe the rebuilding had already begun. 2 months had passed since Emily and I began working side by side, rebuilding Garner Climate and Properties brick by brick. The headlines about the Whitaker empire had faded, but not its shadow. When the FBI froze the accounts connected to Brandon's offshore schemes, they discovered one that bore a familiar name: Emily Garner. The news hit us like thunder. Early one morning, she burst into my office, pale and shaking, holding a letter from the bank. "They froze everything," she said, her voice breaking. "My savings, my cards, even the account I used for rent. I didn't do anything wrong." I read the letter slowly. The seal from the U.S. Treasury sat in the corner like a verdict. "They're not freezing you," I said calmly. "They're freezing what he built with lies." Still, I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear I'd seen in myself years ago when I almost lost everything trying to build this business. That day, I called Richard. Within hours, we were sitting in a cold conference room at the Federal Bank's Compliance Division. Across the table were 2 agents, a banker, and a mountain of paperwork. They asked their questions in that sterile, bureaucratic tone that makes guilt sound inevitable. "Ms. Garner, did you benefit from any of the Whitaker family's funds?" one agent asked. "Yes," Emily whispered. "But I didn't know they were poisoned until they burned everything I loved." The room went silent. I reached for her hand under the table. For the first time, it wasn't me saving her. It was us standing together. Over the following days, Richard gathered every scrap of proof we could find: contracts, invoices, even customer letters from decades ago. Each one told a story of honest work, of pipes fixed, roofs patched, and promises kept. He presented it all to the investigators, piece by piece, until the lies began to unravel. But fate wasn't done testing us. During the audit, Richard uncovered something I hadn't expected: an old development investment I'd made years ago, one Brandon had quietly funneled into his network right before his arrest. My signature, my name, my reputation, entangled in the same fraudulent system I'd exposed. Within 48 hours, the bank froze my business accounts too. Payroll stopped, suppliers pulled out, Garner Properties stood on the edge of collapse. I sat in the dark office that night, staring at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. All I'd worked for, 30 years of sweat and integrity, reduced to a line in a database flagged, "Under investigation." Emily walked in quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "We'll get through this," she said. Her confidence felt like borrowed light. "You believe that?" I asked. "I have to," she said. "You believed in me when no one else did. Now it's my turn." At the final hearing, I told the truth as simply as I could. I spent 30 years building something that outlasted lies, my name. You can freeze money, but not integrity. The room was still. Even the agents looked up from their notes. 3 weeks later, we got the letter. The Department of Justice officially cleared us. Emily's accounts were released, mine too. Brandon's hidden assets were confiscated. The justice system, slow as it was, had done its job. When the funds returned, I made a decision. I didn't want the money back, not all of it. I donated every dollar tied to restitution into a new foundation, the Garner Fund for Honest Work, a trust for small businesses defrauded by corporate greed. The press called it redemption. I didn't see it that way. It was correction, a quiet setting right of something broken. That night, Emily and I stood by the office window, watching the first snow of winter fall over the city. Lights flickered across the streets like small acts of faith. "You didn't just save me," she said softly. "You reminded me what being a Garner means." I looked at her, then at the snow swirling beyond the glass. "Then keep earning that name." Outside, the storm deepened, but for once I wasn't afraid, because some names don't melt, they endure. Spring came early that year. The snow melted off the Santa Fe rooftops, revealing bright red clay beneath the sun. 6 months had passed since the storm, and for the first time in years, life felt steady again. Garner Climate and Properties had reopened its doors, not as the empire it once tried to be, but as a smaller, humbler company that finally understood its own strength. The new office stood on the same foundation as the old one. The walls still smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, but the sign out front gleamed in bronze. Garner Fund for Honest Work. Every morning I'd stop by that sign before walking inside, running my fingers across the engraving. It reminded me that even the hardest lessons could leave something solid behind. Inside, the office buzzed quietly. Our staff had shrunk by nearly half, but those who stayed had become family. They worked with purpose, not fear. Emily ran the residential projects now. Affordable housing for veterans, families, and small business owners who had once been turned away by banks. She didn't talk about the scandal anymore. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for her. One morning, she called from the conference room, "Dad, you should come in here." When I walked in, I saw a crowd, employees, clients, even city officials. Emily stood at the front of the room, her notes trembling slightly in her hand. "We started rebuilding homes," she said, "but what we really rebuilt was trust." Her voice steadied. "My father taught me that money can build walls, but truth builds homes." The room fell silent for a moment, then filled with applause. I stood at the back, clapping quietly. I didn't want the spotlight. Seeing her there, speaking with honesty instead of image, that was enough. After the ceremony, we walked outside together. The air smelled of rain and dust, the scent of renewal. "You did good," I said. "I learned from the best," she replied. Then with a shy smile, "You should probably start believing that you're forgiven." I laughed softly. Forgiveness isn't something you get once. It's something you keep earning. That evening, I drove out of town to the old house where Laura and I had raised Emily. The garden was overgrown, but the bench under the willow tree still stood strong. I sat there, the same way I had all those years ago when everything began to fall apart. Only this time, the silence didn't feel empty. From my coat pocket, I took out the leather notebook I'd carried through every chapter of this story. On the last page, beneath all the old scrawls of numbers and notes, I wrote, "Justice is what the world gives you when you fight. Peace is what you earn when you forgive." I closed it and leaned back, watching the evening light stretch across the garden. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a man fighting to prove himself. I felt like a man who'd already done it. A car pulled up behind me. Emily stepped out, holding a framed photograph. The three of us from years ago, before loss and pride had done their damage. She sat beside me, placing the photo between us. "Mom would be proud," she said. I nodded. She'd tell us to stop overthinking and start living. We sat there until the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The world was quiet, but not silent. The wind rustled through the willow, and in the distance I could hear the faint sounds of hammers from one of our new sites. "If there's one thing I've learned," I said finally, "it's that wealth doesn't measure worth. The real inheritance we leave behind isn't money, it's character and the courage to stand for it." Emily smiled. "Then I guess we're rich after all." The last of the light turned the bronze company sign golden. Somewhere beyond it, I knew new storms would come. But this time, I also knew what we'd built could stand against them. In life, there are moments when everything we've built, our pride, our comfort, our sense of control, crumbles beneath the weight of truth. It's in those moments that character reveals itself. Wealth can vanish overnight, names can be dragged through the mud, and the applause that once filled a room can dissolve into silence. Yet what remains, what truly endures, is integrity. It's the quiet force that survives every betrayal, every disappointment, every storm. Forgiveness is never easy, not because others are undeserving of it, but because it demands that we release the anger that has kept us company for so long. Justice, when it comes, is often imperfect and delayed, but peace is something we can create on our own. It begins when we stop fighting the past and start accepting its lessons. The people we become after loss, failure, or humiliation are not defined by what we lost, but by how we rebuild. Every fall from grace carries within it an invitation to return to the foundations that once made us strong, not the illusions of status or wealth, but the quieter virtues: honesty, effort, compassion, dignity. These are the currencies that can't be frozen or stolen. They grow with every act of courage, every moment we choose truth over comfort, humility over pride. Sometimes, the greatest victories aren't loud or celebrated. They happen in silence, when we decide to keep our word, even when no one's watching, when we choose to forgive without an apology, when we stand firm, even as the world misunderstands us. In those quiet acts of resilience, we rediscover who we are. Time has a way of revealing what really matters. Money fades, reputations shift, but the values that guide our choices remain the only true measure of a life well lived. To build something lasting, we must build it from integrity, compassion, and truth. Because in the end, storms don't destroy what's strong, they only test it. And when the winds finally pass, what stands is not the wealth we've accumulated or the praise we've earned, but the unshakable foundation of a life built with purpose, grace, and the courage to begin again. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage. It's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to, and how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.